Brian here with Dark Rangers Inc. And today we're going to do something totally different. I have the pleasure of interviewing an award-winning and published solar astrophotographer named Brian Champion. And if the name sounds familiar, he was also a top 3 prize winner in the annual Dark Sky contest and somebody that I talk to regularly. He's also a 25-year veteran of photography in general, so he is very accomplished at collecting photons and putting them on a screen in a way that's captivating. He's going to go over essentially everything you need to know for the upcoming eclipse, as well as imaging for solar in general. This is a longer episode, so you might have to stay tuned for a while to get that little nugget of information you're getting. But if you're looking for advice on filters, equipment, camera, scopes, locations, what to do to prep, and what to do actually on game day, this is one you're not going to want to miss. And Brian shares over a decade of solar experience with you guys. He's traveled for the last several and likely will be in Texas for the one here in 2024. As my Patreon group requested this topic, I had to admit to myself, I am not the expert here. And luckily for me, I, on a regular basis, get the opportunity to chat with Brian. He's a subscriber of the channel and always gives me some good feedback. And Brian is going to be monitoring the comment section for any questions, so feel free to post them, and he is a wealth of knowledge. So with that, let's jump into the interview. All right, well, we'll do a little bit of intro. So Brian, thank you for joining the channel and being the solar expert. There is a lot of interest with the upcoming eclipse, and I know you recently went to the one out west. Where did you go for that one?
So I went to Canyonlands in Utah.
Okay.
That looked like this. So one thing about solar eclipses is weather and clear skies, and you have to be flexible. So I went out with the intention of, I knew the approximate area I was going to be in, and I had about 100 miles either way. I was ready to travel if I had to, depending on cloud cover. But my primary location was going to be in Arches.
Okay. And you, for those of you guys that don't know, Brian, how long have you been doing? I know you've been doing astro for a while, and I'm sure in my intro I'll show some pictures that you'll share with me as well. But Brian is a published and award-winning solar photographer, as well as probably your biggest achievement in life, the top 3 finish in the Dark Rangers Inc. Astrophotography. So Brian's not only an accomplished astrophotographer, but also solar as well. How long have you been in both?
So I've been a photographer for almost 25 years now. Astrophotography was just kind of a little side venture from that, which I've been in and out of for the last 20 plus years. Solar photography, I started at the Eclipse in 17. That's what really kind of kicked off my journey into solar. Well, I went to Wyoming. I was right between Casper and Douglas. There was a little wayside there. Well, one bathroom wayside with about 1,500 people. So it was quite an adventure. But while I was there, I met 2 guys that had traveled from Japan, and they had 9 telescopes set up. And they let me look through them, and when I got to look through the hydrogen alpha telescope, that really sealed the deal. I decided that was something I was going to be interested in. So after the eclipse, I started researching different types of equipment, the different options. My first one was a Daystar Quark, and since then I've got a Meade Coronado. I've got several white light filters, Herschel Wedge. If there's a way to do it, I've probably done it when it comes to solar photography. So
yeah, I think that's the big thing for folks is they want to know, a lot of the people that are probably going to watch this video are doing a little bit of astrophotography. They are thinking about the eclipse. Maybe they have a C-Star S50. Maybe they're thinking about getting a filter. Maybe they're thinking about going all in. I think you use a 174 mini or either the MM or the mini is your dedicated camera, correct?
Yep, I have a 174 mm. I also have a 1600 mm I use quite a bit with my bigger solar rig. With white light, you can use a DSLR. The hydrogen alpha scopes they're harder to use with a DSLR because you're only going to get red channel data. There will be no blue or green channel data. So you'll give up 2/3 of your almost 3/4 of your resolution trying to use a DSLR. So you're best off to use a dedicated monochrome camera.
Okay. And now some of our folks have a 2600 mm, which I know you upgraded to about 6 months ago as well. Is that too much camera, or can you can use that?
No, that would be fine. Of course, with anything, whether it be your eye or a camera or whatever, you want to make sure you take some precautions and understand what you're doing, especially when it comes to the white light filters. Like during an eclipse like this, like a total eclipse, once you've entered into totality where the sun is completely covered, it's safe to take the filter off.
Okay.
Matter of fact, you're going to have to if you want to really see anything. And you have to be cautious, right? You don't want to let it go too long. You don't want to pull it off too early. This next eclipse will be the further south you go, it'll be closer to 4 minutes. Further east you go, it'll be around 3 minutes. So you have time. You want to make sure you're fully into totality before you pull that filter off. And then you want to be paying attention on the other side of it as well to make sure you filter back on before it comes out of totality.
Right. What so if somebody's looking to do like I seen you doing, which is actually right behind you, if they're looking to do that whole thing, obviously they have to have the filter on leading into totality, and then I'm assuming once you take the filter off, you're going to have to change your settings, right? Because it's going to be so much lighter.
It actually turns out to be a fair amount darker.
Darker.
Especially
sorry.
It's a little counterintuitive because really all you're going to be able to see is the corona. And naked eye, it just looks like a white fuzzy donut.
Yeah.
It's really what it looks like naked eye. It's quite a thing to witness, though. There's a lot of other things that go along with it, like the wraparound sunset and the temperature drop, and there's quite a few neat things that really go on for that 3 to 4 minutes. But as it relates to the camera, when I shot the 1 in 17, all I had was I had a Nikon D700 and an 800 millimeter lens, and at the time. The only thing I could find was a 100 stop neutral density filter. So I made an adapter for the front of the lens, and I used that. And I got a pretty good image. It took me almost a year to figure out how to process it, though. When I first come back with the image, it was basically a white fuzzy donut. You could see some red in it, which were basically prominences. But it took me almost a year to figure out how to stretch it enough to get the real corona effect. So now I understand more about that, but really, working with Astro really taught me more about stretching, and that was how I finally figured out how to stretch this image into what it turned out to be.
Well, why don't we do that then? So why don't we, because folks are going to be watching at all different levels of equipment and skill. So I know that there are people that are going to be watching that just have a basic camera and lens setup. So use a neutral density filter and 100 stop. For those of you guys that don't know, who I also started with Brian with traditional photography, a 1 stop ND would be reducing the light by half. Every stop is a half. So 100 stop, you're dividing light by half, a lot of times. So you're making it very, very dark, and that's what kept your sensor from melting, because a little bit of public service announcement, there are some inherent dangers. So maybe we go from your DSLR and lens setup, where you could use either a neutral density filter or, I'm guessing, a dedicated solar filter on the front.
Yeah, you're best off with a dedicated solar filter. At the time when I got mine, everybody was completely sold out. So I did some research and come up with 100 stop neutral density was going to be a safe thing to use. And it was, in comparison to other solar filters I've acquired since, it's comparable.
Okay. What would you recommend for dedicated solar for a DSLR and lens setup? And then we'll start to creep through Astro and then dedicated solar. Those will be our 3 stops,
sure.
Maybe.
So there's really basically 2 different types for like a DSLR type setup, and even telescopes. It's kind of 2 flavors. There's a film, or it looks like Mylar, like a shiny Mylar filter.
Okay.
Glass filter. I think my opinion on it is I think the Mylar filter gives a better image than the glass filter does.
Okay.
Seems a little counterintuitive, but it just seems like when I look at like sunspots in it, they just look sharper. The glass filter though does give a nice color.
Okay.
So like if you're using like a DSLR, it'll be a nice orange color, whereas the film will be more kind of a bleached out white look to it.
So when you're looking at the film, you're talking like the Thousand Oak stuff, the Thousand Oak optical, and those are actually much less expensive too, right, than the glass. Is that the brand you would actually recommend, the Thousand Oak?
Yeah, I have a Thousand Oaks glass one. The one I've got is like 4.5 inches, I think.
Okay.
And then a batter film. I just bought a sheet of film and made a wooden ring and used that.
Yeah, because I see on Agena they're only you can buy like 100 millimeter square for like $20 or $10. They're cheap.
Yep. So I also have one for my 8-inch Celestron. I have a full aperture filter for that. Like I said, those come in various sizes. You can get them to fit almost anything, whether it be a camera lens or a telescope. And for this eclipse, being a total eclipse like this, white light is really kind of the primary thing.
Okay.
When I go to, I'll have a hydrogen alpha scope there, but my primary imaging will be white light.
Okay, so you're saying the Mylar film sheets, or if they have one that's custom fit to your size, and then if you do buy the sheet, obviously you're going to have to. I was thinking about just taking a 3D print and band it off mask because they're like $10 and just cut out the middle, right, and then just that.
Another thing that works is you can go to your local Walmart or whatever and go back to the craft section and get quilting hoops.
Oh yeah, or knitting. Yeah, like the knitting stuff because they're just wood rings basically. That's great.
It's 2 wood rings. Put the film over the smaller one, set the bigger one over, tighten the knob, and you got a filter.
And now, if you were going to go the glass route, do you have a recommendation for the glass filter?
Oh, Thousand Oaks.
Thousand Oaks as well.
Yeah.
And those are going to be, I think, when I checked briefly, depending on it, obviously big differences on the size, but or at least $80 to $100, kind of up from there, right? And then for your the next thing would be then you kind of mentioned it is the using an astrophotography. When you say 8-inch, you're talking about your edge, correct?
Great.
And then you're using that at f10, or are you throwing the reducer on that?
Nope, I shoot that right at f10. Well, I can put the reducer on. The change in speed is kind of negligible, but at 1280, whatever that comes out to be with the reducer, and a full frame camera, the sun fits pretty nicely in the frame. So
okay,
that's pretty good comment.
So if you wanted to use if you guys, for those of you that have an edge, so figure 2,000 millimeters, you would need even with a full frame camera, you couldn't get the full sun at 2,000.
I don't think you'll get I think you're going to clip the top and bottom.
Okay.
At 2,000.
Okay, so
it's 12.8, bit of room,
and
it's nice to have a little bit of room.
Right.
Just for, I don't know what kind of mount you're going to be setting on, whether you're, it's probably going to be a more portable setup, so it may not be completely equatorial aligned, so you may not track right. So it's best to have a little bit of room in the frame.
Okay, and then we talked about the DSLR and camera route. We're transitioning into the telescope. So let's say somebody has an AM3, an AM5, an Arizona GTI, some lightweight portable equatorial mount. I know the ASI Air, I believe, has a solar setting. Is that what you're doing? Yep. Okay.
Well, what I did for the last eclipse I went to in October, I have a Skywatcher Solar Quest, which is an alt-az type mount with a sun tracker built into it.
Okay.
Worked really, actually, they're about a $600-ish mount. Worked awesome. It's literally set it up, point it east of the sun, give it about a minute and a half, and it'll track right onto the sun. Does it all automatically. Really, for solar, it is really a slick thing. I took my AM5 with me as well, and I just used the phone app. I didn't use an ASI Air with it. And what I did was, I did kind of a polar alignment hack. I just basically set it up, pointed as north as I could with the compass on my phone.
Yeah.
I select, let it go to the sun, and then I use the Alt-Az knobs then to line it up.
So that's what I do when I go, like if I'm going camping and let's say I'm traveling far enough to where I'm at a different altitude, I'll look up, my coordinates, and let's say I'm at 42 degrees or whatever. I'll use the knobs on the side with the little gauge, and I'll get it to 42, and then I'll take my compass phone and have it so that it's pushed up against the back and get it right at 0 degrees. And then I polar align once it gets dark, and I'm usually within about 1 degrees in both direction, but you can't do that because it's sunny out. But 1 or 2 degrees is probably close enough for solar, right? Because you're taking fast images.
You're like the last eclipse, with even my hydrogen alpha rig, you're still like 25 millisecond exposure. So
yeah,
you just be ready with the controller to keep it lined up in the frame, because like it didn't track perfectly. It tracked pretty good. I could let it sit for a minute or so without having to do anything with it. But there's other options for daytime polar alignment. I have an app on my phone. I think it's Polar Align Pro. Uses the compass and that built into the phone. Sadly, I forgot my wooden adapter when I went out there, so I didn't have a way to use it. But I have just a simple wood adapter that goes into my mount. I set my phone on it, and I can do a daytime polar alignment that'll be within 1 or 2 degrees.
Yeah.
So that might be something to check out if you're going to have, if you're going to take an equatorial type mount. That's a good option to get you really close.
Yeah. I think using your phone and just looking up your current latitude or something like that is going to get you close enough. Because again, we're not doing 5-minute exposures of something trillions of miles away. Although it's actually, I might sound really stupid here. It's actually faster moving relative, right? Because it's so much closer. So it's actually rotating at a faster speed relative to us, right?
It moves a lot faster than it appears.
Yes.
Especially if you got any kind of real magnification. If you're using something like like an SCT, where you're, pretty much full frame view of it, it moves quite quickly by comparison. I have my own observatory here with a permanent pier mount, and it's a harder thing to find than most people think too. You think, how can I not find the sun? Right, it's right there. It's a whole different thing when you have, especially a longer focal length telescope. It's a lot harder to find than you might think.
So do you recommend going to the site a day early, doing a dress rehearsal type situation? Yeah.
Yep. Really good plan.
Get polar aligned that night if you can, and then leave it would be even best case, right?
You could polar align that the night before. That would be ideal. It's not necessary, but it definitely makes your life a little easier if you have that option. But again, like I said, I prefer to remain pretty flexible, especially that morning of the eclipse. You want to make sure you can, if the weather looks sketchy at all, you better be ready to get up early and make an adjustment if you need to, depending on where you're at. For me, this next eclipse, I plan on going to Texas.
Yeah.
Now, will I end up in Texas or not, I don't know. But that's kind of the general, it's going to be April. It doesn't seem like up here in the Midwest is going to be a good choice in April. It's going to go through Texas, Texas, Arkansas, maybe in Illinois, Southern Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. I don't think the northern states are going to be a good choice in April. Again, could be wrong. But statistically, I think you're best off to head south.
Yeah, we're doing the opposite of storm chasing here, basically. So you got to be flexible, but we're going away from the clouds this time instead of going towards them. So let's go into then your dedicated rig. I think you have, is it still a cork setup, like an HA style solar scope, right?
So, I got a picture of it if you want me to show that.
Oh, okay.
So here's the dedicated setup I came up with.
Beautiful.
It's a Skywatcher Evolux 62. It's 400 millimeter scope. So some things about the Daystar Quark. So the Quark is, for hydrogen alpha viewing, is a really great economical option. I think they're around $1,300 to get a Quark. they'll pretty much go on any refractor. That's a pretty low cost hydrogen alpha solution for telescopes. The caveat with it is, though, the cork has a built-in Barlow in it, a 4.3 Barlow.
Oh.
Because for a cork to work correctly, you want it to be around f30. That's really kind of the sweet spot right around. And if you look at their website, it'll tell you the same thing.
And for those that don't know, a Barlow is going to, so it's the opposite of a reducer, basically. It's going to extend the focal length, which will obviously then make it slower.
Right. So if you take my 400 millimeter scope times the 4.3, puts you over 1600 millimeter, which again, you want to be around 1200 millimeters to get a full disk image, whether it be the moon or the sun.
Okay.
Obviously, they appear the same size. That's how we end up with an eclipse.
No, that's because of flat Earth, Brian. That's flat Earth. That's not because of
flat Earth. Yeah, all the other planets are round except Earth.
Right.
Earth's flat.
So you're 1600, and then you're mostly doing mosaics, right? So
this setup I don't have to do mosaic. This I can do a full disk image.
Okay.
What I found to make it work though was I had to put a 0.8 reducer on the scope and then plug the cork into that. So it's kind of weird. You got a reducer and then a multiplier, but that's what you need to be. I needed the scope to be right around the 320 millimeter range. That's where I needed it to be to get this full disk image, and it's a pretty. The frame you see there is how it frames up on the camera.
Okay.
There's very little room to.
So if you have a 2600, if you had a 2600 though with a bigger sensor, you could probably just run the Daystar cork with a 400 millimeter and the Barlow.
I'd have to sit down and do the math on that, but I think it's really, really close.
Okay, because I know a lot of folks have the APS-C. So to be safe for a beginner, you really want to target around 1600 millimeters is what you're always going for with the 1600 mm.
Yeah, somewhere in that vicinity. Yep.
What about with your 174? Obviously, because it's a smaller sensor, you're going to have to go less focal length.
Right. So with the 174 on a rig like this, I can only get about half. Okay. So I have to do a 2-panel mosaic with that.
And then how many are you stacking with the mosaics? Are you just taking one and one, or are you taking a few fast images for each panel, or how does that work?
Let me pull up one of the other ones here. Let's see. So with this rig, this is.
Gosh, you think backspace is a nightmare? Jesus.
Well, that's not even the funny end of it. On this end.
Oh, okay. It gets worse.
Yeah. So there's the blocking filter. So this is. So I have a Coronado Solar Max 3. It's basically a 60 millimeter double stacked Edelon solar scope. And what I did is I took the Edelons, which are these. So these are the double stacked Edelons. The gold piece here is an Edelon. The black one here is an Edelon. And these are what are called tilt tune. So they have these knobs on them, and it basically tilts the Edelon, which changes the way the light goes through it. And what it does is it kind of tunes the hydrogen alpha wavelength to refine it and get it more what you want to see. This setup here is an off-axis setup I come up with. I've had a lot of questions about this. Why didn't I put the thing in the center? Well, an SCT has a central obstruction in it that's almost the same size as what this is. So putting this thing in the middle would be basically useless.
Right.
So I put it off the side. It's a little bit tricky to line up, I guess, because it is off axis. So it does, when I look at it with the camera, basically I have to crop in the frame a little bit because it really vignettes terrible on one side because it is off axis like this. But it works. So when I use this setup here in particular with the 1600, to get a full disk image, I take 24 frames, and each one of those frames I take 500 images.
Okay.
And then I stack the best 5% of each of those, and then I take the resulting 24 panels and then turn them into a mosaic then.
But that's just for so I guess what I was asking for, that's just for a solar image, but with the eclipse, because you're wanting to get the sequence, right? Where you, like the image behind you, you obviously can't take hundreds of photos for each sequence, I'm guessing, because it's moving so fast.
Great. So for that,
I'm guessing for that you use the setup where you don't have to do a mosaic.
right.
Right.
So this was
Okay.
this setup out there. So this here is a 480 millimeter telescope.
Okay.
This was set up for, so with this, I used a 2X Barlow on it.
Okay. So it goes
Which gets
to
you around
900-ish, just under 1,000.
just under 1,000. Had plenty of room in the frame, which this is the Skywatcher Solar Quest mount, and it tracks so well that I could have used a 3X Barlow on it and been better. I wasn't sure how well it was going to track, so I wanted to make sure it had some room in the frame. But it turned out that it tracked super well. So, except if anybody's looking for a decent solar tracking mount, the Solar Quest is the way to go.
And then how are you controlling the camera for that? Because you're obviously doing tons of exposures. I don't see, obviously you're not using Nina or an ASI Air. I do know folks that are going to be using either a Sony or Nikon mirrorless or DSLR. How are you running that camera then the whole time? Because obviously you're not standing behind there pulling the trigger, right?
Well, it wasn't far from that. What I did was on my Nikon, when on the display option, you can bring up, it looks like just a ring in the center of it.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, it fit the sun perfectly. So that was what I would do. I would basically make sure it was lined up. I had my shutter on a 3-second delay. I'd hit the shutter, step back from the camera, let it do its thing. And then I would come over, and this one here was set up on my computer. I had this one set up to where I could move them out, because again, I wasn't perfectly polar aligned, so I could move them out, make sure my framing was good, click off a bunch of exposures. This one was set up for hydrogen alpha. So this one here, I would rattle off like 200 exposures at a time.
How many exposures did you have on the mirrorless? Because I think you have the Z6, I have the Z7 too, so we have almost the same camera. You said they were milliseconds, so like 25 milliseconds times like 20, 50, 100. How many did you have it do?
This one I would just set up and basically take one shot at a time.
Okay.
Because I want to make sure I knew the image I wanted. The picture that is my background here for this meeting. I knew I wanted them fairly centered up, so I wanted to make sure I was centered before each shot. I also made a time-lapse movie of it as well, and again, I wanted it. I've shot enough time-lapse on solar to know that you want to make sure it's centered up as perfectly as possible.
It's going to be wobbling. So you're just with the 3-second, and you're doing, just for folks that don't, why are you doing a 3-second delay? You're doing that because when you tap the screen to start it, there's a little wobble, and so even on a mount, it takes 2-3 seconds for that to stabilize. And so were you just tap 1 2 3 go, tap 1 2 3 go, or were you giving it time in between, or were you just kind of nonstop hitting it?
I was kind of bouncing back and forth between the two of them.
Okay.
So I'd take 1 or 2 images of one. I'd start the sequence over on this rig here, and then I could come over and take 1 or 2 images of this one, come back over, make sure it's lined up, start another sequence with this one, come back, take a couple more of this one. It was a pretty energetic, 2.5 minutes. But that's the exciting part about it. So
if you're a beginner, because one of the gentlemen that I know is in our Patreon group, and he's going to Texas. He's like planning on bringing like 3 rigs, and he's brand new. Would you advise against that? Can he run one on the ASI Air and get that going, and then I think he's going to run the 2600 mm with a ASI Air and an AM5 and a scope, and then I think he was trying to use the AM3 with a Sony mirrorless camera and either another scope or a lens. Would you just recommend doing them both kind of manual, or how would you run that setup?
Well, a lot of it really depends on if you're going to polar align the night before. Because if you're well polar aligned, where it tracks really well, running 3 rigs would be pretty easy. If you have to make adjustments, kind of like I was doing here, it gets to be a lot more work. Because you got to align, shoot, go to the next one, align, shoot, that kind of thing. But yeah, if you're polar aligned well, it shouldn't be too bad to do really. But if you're not, you're going to be bouncing between your rigs quite a bit.
Okay, so polar alignment's really key, guys. And then, yeah, because the ASI air can control your rig, so you could just do like 0.2 seconds would be like 25 milliseconds. Obviously, it's not going to be the same for everybody because we're talking a difference of a lot of stops depending on what you're talking about a 4x Barlow versus a 3x Barlow. Even just that alone could be a big difference in camera settings. So once you kind of dial that in, you could do an auto run essentially with the ASI air, right? If you're polar aligned really good and you're not worried about keeping it centered, and you could just have it rattle off. Let's just say it's 25 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds. You could just have it rattle those off and follow the sun the whole way through if you're perfectly polar aligned, right?
Right.
Okay.
Or if you have a solar trip, like the Skywatcher Solar Quest.
Okay.
So this was the rig I shot for the Eclipse in 2017.
Okay.
Like I said, this 800 millimeter lens on my D700 with my custom made filter adapter, which basically looked like this.
Oh, okay. And you got the little fins to have it hold the
piece of the filter on, and then all I do is flip them off the side, pull the filter off.
Very cool.
It is neck down quite a bit, but for solar, it's kind of irrelevant. It's so bright that it doesn't really matter if you have a field aperture or not. So yeah, that was what I took for that eclipse, and I got some various images from that. This was kind of the wraparound sunset effect.
Oh, okay.
It was like this circle all the way around.
It's like a 360 sunset. That's very cool.
It was really, and this next eclipse will be that way as well, being a total eclipse like that.
So you
tried to
go ahead.
I tried to not change my exposure settings so it would actually show how dark it was getting.
Yeah, I mean that's that's dark.
It was dusk.
Yeah.
You could see. I believe it was Vega was the one star you could see in the sky during totality.
Wow.
Here's my image. So this here is not
stunning.
Hot pixeler. That's Vega.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
And like I said, you can see some of the prominences here where it shows up red around there like that. You can see like where these loops are. Those are actually prominences.
Now, was this with the white? This was with the white filter, the Mylar White Oaks one.
Nope. This was no filter.
Oh, this was no. Oh, this was with your 100X ND.
Yep.
Very cool.
So during totality, you can take the filter off, and then this is what you'll get.
So you must have been shooting that fairly fast. What was your speed on that? Do you remember ballpark?
I can't remember what it was. It was actually. So I didn't know. I didn't know what the exposure should be, right? Because you're a manual. So what I did was, when you don't know, bracket, right? So that was basically what I did. I just kept changing my exposure, figuring, one of the images I was going to get was going to be okay. So I shot hundreds of images. I was shooting as fast as I could, just changing my exposure as I went, by like a half stop at a time, until I found, because there was really no time to, this eclipse in 17 was 2.5 minutes. So there really wasn't a lot of time to be, looking at the screen, seeing what you got. And, this was, this was not on a tracking rig.
Okay. It looked like you shot on a ball head.
Yeah, this was just basically it's a J head, but this was me keeping it aligned. but this is what I had at the time, so that's how I did it.
So just like I think everybody's looking for that magic one workflow that those of us that have been doing astro for a while know there isn't it. It doesn't exist. When it comes to this, there is no magic set it and forget it. It's going to be a little hectic. It's going to be seat of your pants, and you're going to have to be, kind of on point and flexible is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, flexibility, adaptability.
Yeah.
um, I would highly recommend whatever filter you're going to use, whatever rig you're going to use, practice. Go out on a sunny day, get it figured out how you're going to find the sun, because it is a lot harder to find than you might think. One kind of trick I learned was this ring up here made a pretty nice shadow on the ground, and I could see, finding the camera around the shadow, I knew I wasn't lined up. That was how I got my primary alignment. And I had practiced that beforehand before I went. Because I looked at, how am I going to line this thing up, right? Because I tried just pointing at it, and with a 100 stop neutral density filter on, you can't see anything till you actually get to the sun. So, I started contemplating, my life choices there. I thought, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
And then I realized, standing there looking at it, I could see the shadow on the ground, and if I could see like the bottom of the body sticking out of the shadow, I knew, I was not lined up, and I had to move it.
It's almost like collimating two mirrors, right? Because it's like you want the front end should be pretty much covering up the back end.
Right. And even with like this setup here, it kind of has the same effect, right? If you see any part of this in the shadow of this, you're not lined up.
Yeah. So the shadow from the front of the rig should be blocking the full shadow of the much thinner camera behind it. Otherwise, if it's off kilter, you know the sun's not pointing directly down the lens. That's pretty smart.
Solar shooter trick here is this little finder here is like a $25 thing, basically what it is, it's got a pinhole in the front and this kind of white plastic on the back, like a crosshair on it. That'll get you really, really close.
Okay.
So it drops right in your normal finder slot. These are all things I learned after I went to the first Eclipse. So, I'm happy to impart that knowledge on anybody who's going to need it. So.
And then is that just like an Amazon thing or?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I know we did talk a little bit about when we were prepping for this, a little bit of safety. Obviously, guys, the sun will melt your camera sensor through magnification. It will also melt your eyeball. So, Brian, I know you have a little bit of a safety speech.
Yeah. There's a sticker on the side. Excuse me. Water went down the wrong hole. There's a reason that sticker's on the side of a telescope, tells you not to point it at the sun. If that telescope happens to be in focus, when you look in that viewfinder with no filter on it, it'll be just like looking at, the last thing you'll see out of that eye is a white spot.
Yeah.
Not to sound too gruesome about it, but I want to make sure everybody understands, the power of the sun, especially when it's, magnified through a telescope like that. So just, understand what you're doing. Make sure you never point a scope at the sun without a decent filter on it, whether it be a front mount glass filter. There's also what's called a Herschel wedge, which looks like a diagonal. Those are a good, white light option as well. They're quite a bit more expensive. It probably offers the highest resolution view you can see in white light.
Herschel wedge, is that what it is?
Herschel wedge.
Okay.
Yep. Solar wedge, it's called. There's a couple different companies that make them. The one I have is a Lunt. I know Botter makes them.
Lunt seems to be the big name in solar, or one of them.
Lunt.
Coronado.
Coronado's. I like my Daystar Quark, but it's not quite as high a contrast view as like my Solar Max 3 is. It's. Let's see here. I think I've got. Yeah. So I can kind of give an idea here of what the two look like side by side.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I think most of the
Well,
images that you show me are from the one with the darker background. That's still
right.
really
So
cool though.
this is what the cork looks like.
Yeah, that's
So
stunning.
the cork gives, I think, I would definitely call it better detail, but lower contrast. So
Zoom
like
in
the
again,
film is
because it's
there.
amazing how good it holds up on Zoom. I mean, wow, that's incredible. I mean, I'm looking at it at probably 480 or 720p, and it still looks great. So for folks that are watching on YouTube, it's really pretty tremendous what you're able to get.
Yeah. And this is my cork setup with that Skywatcher 400 millimeter scope.
So the cork is basically in between the camera and then the main telescope. So this is kind of it's kind of going where you would put the reducer, well, you in the imaging train, kind of in between the main scope body and the camera.
Correct.
Okay. And
Yep.
what do these go for? Like if someone wanted to throw this on one of their 400 millimeter telescopes, what would the investment be?
So a Daystar cork like this one, they're right around $1,300, I believe.
Okay, so that's reasonable because the Coronado, the dedicated scopes are 4,000 plus from what I've seen, most of them.
Now this Coronado, so this is the Coronado, definitely not as good a detail.
Yeah,
Um,
very noticeable.
the contrast, this is pretty much what the contrast looks like right out of camera.
Yeah.
Much higher contrast.
Okay.
Now I've gotten some. So one thing to keep in mind here is this is on an APO scope, on an APO scope. This is an achromat.
Oh, so it's a lower quality scope as well.
Right. So there's been, I've talked to a lot of different people about it, and I was under the impression that, whether it was an APO or an acro, it really wasn't going to matter because you were dealing with one fine wavelength, right? It's basically hydrogen alpha wavelength. But what I've learned from my experience is it makes quite a bit of difference.
Yeah.
Whether it's on an APO or an acro.
Can you pull that cork back up? Because to me, it's like double the resolution almost. I mean, it's significant. Yeah, I mean, that's night and day.
It's, so both of these you can put eyepieces on them as well. The cork you can put an eyepiece on, behind the cork. The cork, to look at it visually, the nice thing about the cork is it takes about 15 minutes for them to come to temperature. You just plug it into a USB power pack. That's all I use, like a backup battery. Takes about 15 minutes for it to come to temperature, and you get a really nice high-resolution view through an eyepiece. It's really quite astounding. Where the Coronado, it takes a while to, especially on the one I have, the double stack version, you have two etalons to adjust, plus on the front of it is called a rich view tuner. So you got basically 3 adjustments, plus your focus you got to deal with. Not for the faint of heart to try to get it lined up. The LUNTs are a little bit different yet. The LUNT has what's called a pressure tuner on it. Just a big knob on the side of it. Basically, it's changing the pressure in the etalon to fine-tune the hydrogen alpha wavelength. The LUNTs I haven't had the opportunity to look through one, so I don't know. I can't say firsthand what the differences would be. But looking at pictures I've seen guys take with them, it's comparable to the cork, I would say. I think they're kind of somewhere in between the cork and the Coronado.
This is really nice. So this image is a 1600 with the cork, and then with your Skywatcher. Was it a Skywatcher scope that you had on the front?
Evolux 62.
And is that Evolux a doublet or is that a triplet?
It's a triplet.
That's a triplet.
No, I think they're doublet.
Yeah, I thought they were a doublet.
They're a doublet with ED glass.
Okay, so and you're all in. So you're 1,300 for the cork. That scope is probably what, $400 to $800, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was right around 4, I think.
Okay, so 17, and then most people probably already have the camera. And so then is there, and then what else is there? Was there the Barlow still that you had to purchase, or was that a part of the cork setup?
That's built into the cork.
Okay.
I had to put the reducer on. Let's see. Yeah.
So for
So I had to put the,
$1,700, I mean, for $1,700, you can get a fairly dedicated pro-ish quality rig that you was this the rig that you got you were published in the magazine with, or was that a different
no,
setup?
that was let's see, where is it?
So
Got too
Brian
many
was
things
recently
open.
published.
That was this
Okay, and what magazine was that again?
amateur astronomy.
Amateur Astronomy. Okay. And which setup was this? I see 2600. Oh no, that's somebody else's.
Yep, that's the one below. So this was with my 1600 on 100 millimeter Skywatcher ED.
Okay.
So this one turned out to be 24 panels. With a the 100 millimeter is 900 and like 960 millimeter focal length, I think.
Oh, times 4.3.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So if somebody already
Yeah.
has
So
a scope though, they could so if you have a 400 millimeter, like a 70 to 80 millimeter, even like a 60 millimeter scope, you could just buy this cork for not a huge investment, and then use it with an existing mono camera, right? And get a magazine that you could get published, or get an image that we could publish you in an astronomy magazine. So that's actually pretty reasonable. That's assuming you've already invested quite a bit of money, but most of us already have. We're already in that position. So would would your so for somebody just looking to go into it, your first choice, cheapest, easiest, is going to be the Mylar style white paper styles, or white scope, and then white light scope, sorry, and then your secondary would, if you wanted to take it further, would be to get that cork set up, and obviously a much bigger investment, but obviously better results. Do you have an example with just the Mylar filter? Is that what this is?
So that's basically what this is.
Okay.
This was the one out in Utah, and this is so this was Thousand Oaks filter, and this is basically the color right out of the camera. I didn't alter this. This is kind of the color it gives, and like I said, it's the one I have is just a 4-inch filter.
And what scope was this shot on?
So this is this was a Daystar scope I had.
Okay.
I think it's like 180 millimeter scope.
Okay.
And it goes on there. It's got 3 nylon screws on it. Attaches right to the front.
Beautiful.
Pretty easy to use.
So for the ultimate beginner rig, for essentially whatever that filter costs, and your astrophotography rig you already have, you can get a very respectable shot, which is great.
Yeah. So when I was deciding what I wanted to take out there, so I had the option. I've got that 100 millimeter Skywatcher, or I've got this one, which this one with a 2x Barlow on it turns out right about the same focal length. And I didn't have this mount long enough to know just how much I could put on it. How much off center weight you could put on it. There's no counterbalance or anything on it, so I wasn't sure how much it handled, but I'd already tested this rig out. I knew it would work, so I opted for this setup instead of the 100 millimeter scope is like 3 feet long. I wasn't sure mounting my DSLR that far off center, if this little mount can handle that or not. So I opted for this.
And just like with astrophotography, less focal length is going to be more forgiving, right? I mean, it's going to, if you're having problems, it's going to be easier to find. If it gets off center with tracking, a lot more forgiving with less focal length, I'm assuming.
Right.
Okay.
Best to have a little room.
Well, I think, this makes it a lot more approachable for someone like me. I just haven't gotten the bug yet, and I know you talk about it, and I love looking at your images. It just hasn't, even same with planetary. I know I'll get there at some point, but it is really cool to see that you could take most of the equipment you already have and either just grab a filter for $20, or for a little over $1,000, grab it, get that cork, and get something that is, really, an amazing image with a ton of detail. You can see everything that's going on there with the sun, and something you're really proud of. It doesn't have to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. assuming you already have a good chunk of the equipment, which most of us already do. So that's great.
All right.
Yeah, if you can send me all these, I will include them so you guys can take a screenshot. When we're talking about them, I'll blow them up over the whole screen, and then that way you guys will have been able to have taken a screenshot. And then this is your observatory, right? Your roll-off roof observatory you just built last year.
Yep.
Very
So
cool.
so you see that little finder on there. You can see how handy that is, right?
Yeah.
It's a very handy little feature to have right there.
Do not use a red
so
dot.
This is the yeah. So this is the 400 millimeter Skywatcher.
Okay.
And then you can see about here. That's the amount of room I have to deal with there.
Oh, wow.
Top and bottom.
So
that's
one of and that's with the Quark with the 4.3x Barlow. So like 250, like a Red Cat 51 would be great for that then, right? Because you'd be a little over 1,000 millimeters, and you'd have a good amount of room to spare.
Yeah. So I have that my ASCAR 300 millimeter. I've been kind of anxious to try this out on that setup as well, because that would get me that that's a native 300 millimeter.
Yeah.
This Skywatcher, I have a 0.8 reducer on it, puts it right around 320.
Okay.
And the 4.3 on top of that. I think the 300 would give me just a little bit more room top and bottom here.
Yeah.
Which would be a little.
Well, and because every millimeter is getting multiplied by 4.3, so the difference between 320 and 300 is actually over 100 millimeters by the time you get out to the end of the scope. So yeah, for folks, I know someone that's going to have the new Pleiades, William Optics, which is like right around 280, or 260, somewhere in there, 250 to 280, somewhere in that focal length. And then if you have a Red Cat, or we have a lot of folks with an FRA 300, and then the 400, you'd want to have a reducer or a bigger camera than the 1600, right? Okay.
So you do run into a little bit, like with the Quark setup, you do run into a little bit of problem. I have to try it out with my 2600 to see, but I suspect it might start to vignette.
Okay. So the imaging circle starts to run out of steam at APS-C. Okay. Okay. Well, fair enough.
Like the 1600, I knew it would work with that, which is kind of why I focused on that. One other thing I should probably mention about this too is, since we're into this, so this piece right here, it's not just a fancy camera adapter, it's actually a tilt adapter.
Oh, okay.
So one thing that happens with solar, especially with the Quark, I haven't really noticed it. I guess I noticed it a little bit with my Coronado setup. But one thing is you'll get what are called Newton's rings. And it's basically an interference pattern. So basically it looks like circular rings in your image. Near impossible to edit out. I've tried many times and it's near impossible. The only way around it is a tilt adapter. You have to tilt the camera a little bit.
So you actually want a little tilt.
Right.
So
it's counter.
Yeah, it's with the 2600s. So for folks who use yeah, because we're jumping down the rabbit hole to try to solve tilt. On the 2600s, which a lot of people are using, they have a tilt plate. Obviously, I know you can't give a definitive answer. Would you want to preset a little tilt then going out? Like what you could do is the little grub screw, you could maybe add a 0.5 millimeter or 1 millimeter of tilt to one end of the tilt plate going into it. How much tilt are you introducing?
So on this is about the diameter of the bigger cameras. I'd probably say I'm close to 2 millimeters on that.
Okay. So it is something that's a really good tip. If it's that, this is the reason why you stay an hour and 6 minutes into a video to get a. Yep. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, that's at least 2 millimeters. I would say.
This really applies to hydrogen alpha. If you're doing white light, it mostly is irrelevant.
Okay.
Some other things that you can do with white light, just for fun, we can look at that as well. So this was shot with a calcium filter. So I mentioned a Herschel wedge. So I got an 1.25 inch calcium filter. Now the thing about the calcium filter in particular is you cannot look through it. It's purple like this. It starts out black and white, obviously, but it's actually an ultraviolet filter. and all that comes out of it is ultraviolet light. So you definitely do not want to be looking into that one. But it allows you to see some of this plays around the sunspots, the detail in the sunspots. And then I also have it's called a solar continuum filter.
Wow.
Which this one you can look at.
It's like night vision.
It's kind of a green. When you look in it, it's green. And from what I understand, it's supposed to improve. Since our eyes are much like camera sensors, right? Twice as many green receptors as there are red and blue. It provides a better looking image.
This does look better to me than the purple one. Like the detail around those spots looks a little clearer, so I could see that.
Especially around in the fine details. And when you look at it visually, it's very noticeable to have this filter in versus no filter at all, or an ND type filter.
What was this one called again?
This one is a solar continuum.
Solar continuum. Okay.
This is a calcium filter.
Very nice.
And incidentally, if you look at the Daystar Solar website, you'll see they have quarks for calcium. I want to make sure I get all this right. Calcium, sodium, magnesium. It seems like there's one more that I'm forgetting. Oh, there's also two versions of the quark. There's the chromosphere version, which is what all my images are shot with. That's what I have. There's also a prominence version.
Prominence and
which allows. So maybe we should have probably went over some solar terms, right? So these features here are called prominences.
Okay.
Or solar flares. You can think of them as solar flares. These features like this would appear to be like ribbons are filaments.
Okay.
So basically, think about what this looks like. This is the same as this.
Just different.
But you're looking at this. Well, you're looking at it straight on.
Right.
Versus this, you're looking at. And these are, if you were to look at this with a white light filter, these would be sunspots. The real bright regions would be basically sunspots. But all the dark and everything else, you don't see that with white light. You only see that with hydrogen alpha.
And just to clarify for people who think they can throw a 3 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter, can you just dispel the fact that it's not the same hydrogen alpha? Well, it is the same hydrogen alpha, but not the same equipment.
Not the same equipment, no.
Yeah. No, so it won't be of help at all, really.
That'd be a quick way to lose an eyeball or a camera.
Okay. Yeah. I know for most of you're rolling your eyes, but I know I have seen the question asked, oh, can I just use I've got a 3 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter. Can I just use that? No, you're still going to cook your sensor or your eyeball. Well, these are fantastic images. I mean, any final tips, for a newbie going out to do this for the first time?
Yeah, flexibility, adaptability. Be ready to move, with very little notice. I've talked to several people about, what their plans are. And some people are, they've found a cabin or hotel or whatever somewhere in the totality zone. I've heard of people getting reservations canceled that they've had for over 2 years because hotels now found out, something interesting is going on. We can triple the rates and people will pay it. So I've heard of people getting their reservations canceled. For me, for this next eclipse, I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did when I went out to Utah. I'm going to pick a general region to go to, have maybe 100, 200 mile radius around that of alternate places I can go. I'll probably go, on the side road somewhere where I can set up. I'll probably camp in my car, at least for the day of the eclipse. It's
you're on a mission, man. You are on a mission. It's not about comfort. It's not about ease. You are there to get a killer shot and have it published or featured, and you were successful. And I like that message. I think a lot of people are looking for. I see this so much as somebody who gets to interact with a lot of astrophotographers. Everybody's looking for the correct or the right way or the one. There's so many. We're dealing with moving objects and changing conditions, weather, all of these things. This idea that you can just kind of plan all ahead and foresee every consequence and just set up in a perfect spot and have it go perfectly is an illusion. You're going to have to be flexible, like you said. You're going to have to be able to think on the fly. You even see this with Milky Way photography, like trying to get the good foreground at the right time before, as the sun's going down, and finding the perfect angle. It's kind of a hectic 10 or 20 minutes, and it's kind of the same thing here, it sounds like. So well, who knows? I've got some folks on the channel that have invited me down to Texas, for Astro. Maybe I'll have to hop in the car with you if I'm still out in the Midwest and go do this. But it's definitely awesome. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. I would have had none of the hands-on experience that you do, and I wouldn't have even bothered doing a video. But I know, the whole point of the channel is to help people with their astrophotography and to yield to an expert when I don't know what I'm talking about in a certain situation. And this would definitely be one of those situations. So Brian, I really appreciate you doing this. I know you've been watching the channel. Brian gives me I get a little report card after every video. I get a comment. Oh, it's a good one. I like this. Or and then we talk about stuff too, because we were always trying to talk about what would be a good beginner rig, this or that. So Brian's a great choice to talk to when it comes to equipment. He's very knowledgeable. And Brian, I guess my final ask before we would jump off is that maybe keep an eye on the comments for this one. And guys, I know Brian's very knowledgeable, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions in the comments on this video.
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to answer whatever I can.
All right, Brian, thank you very much. And guys, as always, until the next one, clear skies.